Title page, dedication and preface to the Miut Amil and Shurhoo Miut Amil, two elementary treatises on Arabic syntax, translated from the original Arabic with annotations, philological and explanatory in the form of a perpetual commentary. The rules exemplified by a series of stories and citations from various Arabian authors, with an appendix containing the original text by A. Lockett, captain in the Bengal Native Infantry, secretary to the Council of the College of Fort William, and examiner in the Arabic, Persian, and Hindustani languages. Calcutta, printed by P. Pereira at the Hindustani Press, 1814. Recorded for the Librivox Language Learning Collection, Volume 5. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Abu Jalal. To His Excellency, the Right Honourable Francis Earl of Moira, K.G., Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief of British India, etc., etc., etc. This work on Arabic syntax is respectfully inscribed by His Lordship's most obedient and most humble servant, Abraham Lockett. Title page, dedication and preface to the Miut Amil and Shurhoo Miut Amil by Abraham Lockett. Preface. Of the two original works forming the subject of the present volume, and of which an English translation is now for the first time submitted to the public, the Miut Amil, or that comprising the text, contains a brief but comprehensive view of the first division of Arabic syntax, or of that part which treats of the government exercised by nouns, verbs, and particles. The second, or Sharh, is a commentary on the former, and illustrates by a more minute and detailed analysis the various rules recorded in the text, and the general acceptations of the several governing powers. The first book is entitled Miut Amil, or the 100 Governing Powers, because the author has contrived to reduce to that precise number the whole of those powers in Arabic construction which are found to affect the terminations of nouns and verbs. A synopsis of this system may be seen in the commencement of the work, and a brief explanation of its leading divisions will be found in the concluding remarks to the translation. It is unnecessary, therefore, to enter into any further detail, and I shall merely observe of the title that, although it appears in some degree affected, and is not, I imagine, altogether strictly correct, yet the general design of the treatise displays so much skill and ingenuity, and combines at the same time so many excellencies of brevity, order, perspicuity, and precision, that it may be fairly considered, on the whole, as the most judicious compendium of Arabic regimen that has yet appeared in the language. Those indeed who are fond of simple abstracts of science will have no reason to complain of the length or difficulty of the Miut Amil. It contains in something less than 5 quarto pages the most important department of Arabic syntax, and is almost entirely free from those little verbal quibbles and philological fopperies which tend more or less to disgrace almost every work on Arabic grammar. The title, to be sure, carries with it an appearance of superfluous exactness, and some little grammatical finesse will no doubt be discovered in the author's mode of supporting it. Note: his method is as follows. He divides regimen into two general classes or departments, termed verbal and absolute. By the first is simply understood the effect that one word has upon the termination of another. By the second is meant that specific mark of case assumed by a noun when used absolutely as the nominative to a sentence. The government in the first instance is termed verbal, because the change of termination is occasioned by some word either expressed or understood. In the second, it is called absolute, because the word thus governed is considered independent of all verbal agency, and acquires this peculiar form of construction from its nominative situation alone. Verbal government he then subdivides into two distinct classes. The first comprehends 91 specific words, which are termed from their nature prescriptive governors. The second contains 7 distinct classes of words, such as verbs, adjectives, participles, infinitives, etc., etc., each of which necessarily includes all the words of its own species, and each of these classes he considers numerically as one, and terms the whole analogous governors. Here then are all the verbal governors in the language reduced to 98, namely 91 in the prescriptive and 7 in the analogous class, to which if we add 2 in the absolute, we shall have an exact centenary of governing powers. Endnote. But this is too petty an objection to merit any remark. It is in truth a mere systematic capriccio, a solitary particle out of the great Arabian desert of metaphysical refinement, where subtleties swarm populous, unnumbered as the sands of Barca or Cyrene's torrid soil. I know not well what the votaries of the Eastern oracles will say to this comparison. I fear they will rise indignant against me for venturing an expression that may tend to degrade the literary eminence of the Arabs. But this is not my intention. I would rather support than lessen their importance. I consider myself in some measure as one of their disciples, and certainly feel respect for their language and literature. But although I freely acknowledge their merits, I will not acknowledge the infallibility of their doctrines, nor voluntarily subscribe to all their grammatical dogmas, their superlunar speculations, their metaphysical distinctions twixt south and southwest side, and the whole host of fallacies and fictions with which they perplex and embarrass the most simple subjects of literature. Undoubtedly their works discover both genius and learning, and in the minute cultivation of many sciences, particularly grammar and rhetoric, it may be doubted whether they have been surpassed by the learned of any other nation. But their literary affectation, by disfiguring their works, diminishes in a considerable degree the real merit of their labours, and throws so many unnecessary impediments in the way of the student, that it is not very surprising we should find them almost entirely neglected. One specimen of their solemn mode of trifling in literary works may be worth inserting. The author of the grammatical treatise termed the Kafiyeh, for some reason best known to himself, neglected to prefix to his grammar the usual auspicatory formula of praise to the deity, the omission of which is considered by the sober Mussulmans as a serious mark of impiety. It was therefore necessary to defend this omission, and accordingly his commentator Mullah Jami, in the true spirit of casuistical sophistry, settles the point of conscience as follows. It is observable, says he, that the author, Sheikh Ibn al-Hajib, has not commenced his work with the prescribed ceremonial of praise to the deity. This omission, however, must not be attributed to negligence or contumely. Then to what must it be attributed? Why, to a proper sense of modest humility, to be sure, which led him to depreciate his own merit as a grammarian in comparison with those who preceded him, the grace of God be upon them, and consequently he thought himself unworthy to imitate their works in any respect. But although, continues the commentator, he has omitted the actual insertion of the words, it cannot therefore be inferred that in direct opposition to the positive injunction of the sacred ritual, he has neglected the ceremony altogether. Oh no, that would be an unreasonable and unnecessary supposition, particularly as we know, adds he, that it is not restricted to verbal forms alone, but may be virtually discharged in secret mental aspirations. Now, this is considered a very conclusive piece of reasoning, and completely exculpates the grammarian from all manner of censure. Note, see Commentary on the Kafiyah by Mullah Jami, page 1. End note. In speculations of this nature, the Arabian grammarians seem to take peculiar delight. 1/3 of the Commentary on the Kafiyah by Mullah Jami consists of subtleties and sophisms, which have very often no more connection with the science of grammar than with the science of palmistry. Every trifle gives occasion for an episode, and every episode is conglutinated or made up. Note, hic liber est conglutinatus, etc. Epist obscurorum virorum. See Pursuits of Literature, page 102. End note. Of as much recondite erudition as the learned commentator can well muster together. After defining a word, he ascends synthetically to language as a compound, which comprises, he says, the language of God, of man, of angels, and of genii. Note, an analogous division of language prevails among the Hindus. Quote, the gods speak Sanskrita, benevolent genii Prakrita, wicked demons Pisachi, and men of low tribes and the rest Magadhi. End quote. Colebrook on Sanskrit and Prakrit, A.R. 7, 199. End note. Lest anyone, however, should be puzzled to find out the true nature of this latter dialect, a learned scholiast comes forward with a specimen. Note, it is also given in the Tulkhisul Miftah, a treatise on Arabic rhetoric, as a specimen of verbal harshness, and is supposed to have been uttered by a jinn after having killed a traveller in the Arabian desert, whose name was Hurb. It turns out, however, to be a very intelligible Arabic, though in, quote, words so debased and hard, no stone is hard enough to touch them on. وَقَبْرُ حَرْبٍ بِمَكَانٍ قَفْرٍ وَلَيْسَ قُرْبَ قَبْرِ حَرْبٍ قَبْرٍ, which the reader may compare with the well-known line in Homer, Polla, Danaula, Gataula, Paraula, de Dochmia, Delthon, so happily paraphrased by Pope, o'er hills, o'er dales, o'er crags, o'er rocks they go, jumping high o'er the shrubs of the rough ground, rattle the clattering cars, and the shocked axles bound. End note. And another gravely adds, as an infallible proof of its demoniac originality, that no human being can pronounce it 3 times successively at one breathing. Through this commentary, however, this khasma mega of syntax, or some other of equally crude consistence, every student is obliged to, quote, swim or sink, or wade or creep or fly, end quote, who would aspire to anything like literary distinction. Mullah Jami is indeed the Priscian of the East, and his comment is considered the very ne plus ultra of grammatical knowledge. Not to have read it argues absolute ignorance. Read it, and you are dubbed at once a mullah and a man of learning. Such is the wonder-working efficacy of Arabic grammar. It supersedes in a great degree the knowledge of every other art and every other science, being in fact, if we may credit some of the learned Arabian doctors, the very essence of all the arts and sciences. But grammar, after all, in its obvious and natural sense, is truly a simple art, the art of teaching the rules of inflection and syntax, or the various relations of words to one another in discourse. The rules necessary for this knowledge are neither very numerous nor difficult, and perhaps not more so in Arabic than in other languages. But the Arabian philologers, by blending them with the abstract speculations of logic, have effected a new and complex system of grammar, a system which comprises not merely the various relations, but the exact significations and definitions of words, their divisions into genera or classes, their combinations into propositions, and these again into reasoning or discourse. Now all this is the proper business of logic, which is surely a distinct science. Yet all this they have in some measure confounded with the simple rules of government and concord, so that a student looking into their works for a plain rule of syntax finds himself entangled in all the mysteries of metaphysics. There are some men, says Johnson, who seem to think nothing so much the characteristic of genius as to do common things in an uncommon manner, like Hudibras, to tell the clock by algebra, or like the lady in Dr. Young's satires, to drink tea by stratagem, to quit the beaten track only because it is known, and take a new path, however crooked or rough, because the straight was found out before. This is precisely the case with the Arabian grammarians. They are always employed in raising straws with levers, in illustrating what cannot be misunderstood, in devising difficulties where none ever existed, and in perplexing the simplest rules of regimen and concord with useless subtleties and logical definitions. But if grammar be a particular art, what has it to do with general and abstract speculations, a disquisition on symbols and conventional signs, or the origin of general terms will not facilitate a student's progress in the laws of syntax. Note, see the Shurhoo Mullah and the Shurhoo Ruzi, endnote. These may be important enquiries, but they are not the more so because conducted in Arabic. They have in truth no more connection with the language of the Arabs than with the language of the troglodytes. It is indeed amusing to observe the very opposite opinions of learned men on the subject of grammar. Some will have it a science which views language only as significant of thought, and this is philosophical or general grammar. Others consider it as a simple art, which teaches the inflection of words and their due disposition into sentences and phrases, and this is particular grammar. A third race of philologers will neither allow it to be general nor particular, but a mixture of both, and this may be properly called mixed or Arabic grammar. The modern grammarians of Europe consider grammar and etymology as synonymous terms, and with them all languages go upon wheels. Note, in days of yore they were dragged about like sledges. Diversions of Purley, Volume 1, page 25. End note. But those of Arabia, who have no acquaintance with verbal antiquities, reject etymology altogether, and substitute in its place a dash of dialectics with which they are acquainted. Here then are two opposite roads to the same end, and the student may take his choice, either to adopt the plan of Horntuck and his followers, and set about digging for grammar through some dozen or 15 collateral dialects, or getting boldly on the back of synthesis with Mr. Harris and the Arabian grammarians, gallop circuitously to it through the whole region of science. Note Hermes, page 3. End note. In order to learn any language with accuracy and facility, we must first endeavour to learn its rules, or the customary application of its words. These in their simple state, disencumbered of all technical formalities, are seldom difficult and may easily be acquired. But when once perplexed with obscure etymologies and logical definitions, and when every Deitch and Dilworth, who writes a twopenny halfpenny guide to the 8 parts of speech, deems it his duty to work them up into what he calls a new grammatical system, then indeed they assume a different character, or rather a variety of different characters, and are not easily acquired at all. The student, finding himself bewildered in the wordy labyrinth, abandons the study altogether, and willingly consigns to the fates the whole race of miserable grammarians with their miserable canons. Felix grammaticus non est, sed nec fuit unquam, nec quisquam est Felix nomine grammaticus, aut siquis Felix praeter fatum extitit unquam, istemum excessit grammaticos canones. Note Alcyonus, Ep. 126. End note. As far, however, as relates to the present system of Arabic grammar, at least to the technical and speculative part of it, as distinct from the practical, my own opinion is that it is chiefly, if not entirely, derived from the philosophical writings of the Greeks, and particularly from those of Aristotle, with which the Arabs had been long and familiarly acquainted. They have certainly adopted his analysis of language. Note De Interpret 104, page 38. End note. His definition of the parts of speech. Note De Poetica 34, page 67. End note. His reasoning on substance and accident, or mode. Note Accidens vero sive modus est rei proprietas, quae in aliqua substantia inhaeret, nec sine ipsa potest existere. Element Logicae. By accident here, and in Arabic grammar as applied to an infinitive, or ismu hadeth, is not meant, as has been erroneously supposed, anything casual or fortuitous. But as this is a point of some importance to the true understanding of an Arabic, again, masdar, for an explanation of which I refer the student to my annotations on the commentary, page 195. I shall lay before him Dr. Gilly's note on the subject, which will certainly corroborate one material point of my argument. Quote, the Greek word synthethikos is, as far as I know, universally translated accident. Synthethekota, in the plural accidents, from which accidents, denoting the little book that explains the properties of the 8 parts of speech, is generally held to be a corruption. But accident, in its proper sense of what is casual or fortuitous, has nothing to do with the one or the other, and Aristotle's meaning of synthethekos ought to be expressed by a Latin or English word derived not from accido but from accedo. See page 65, endnote, which they have applied to words under the grammatical denominations of nouns and infinitives, and this whole theory of the elements of language as significant of ideas. These are some of the principal topics which the Arabian grammarians take delight in discussing, and to which they not improperly attach a high degree of importance. But the merit of originality must be transferred to the Stagirite, whose dialectics, if I am not much mistaken, will be found to contain the most remarkable facts that distinguish the philosophical grammar of the Arabs. Indeed, the whole philosophy of the Arabs may be traced to the Greeks. Note, see Abu Farag, Per Pocock, Dynast, page 160. Greek was a familiar language to the Arabians. The accounts of the caliph's treasury were always written in Greek, till the year of Christ 715. They were then ordered to be drawn in Arabic. Many proofs of this might be mentioned. Greek was a familiar language in Mahomet's household. Zayd, one of Mahomet's secretaries, to whom he dictated the Quran, was a perfect master of Greek. Sale's Preliminary Discourse, page 144-145. The Arabic gold coins were always inscribed with Greek legends, till about the year 400. See Wharton, Hist. Eng. Poet. Theophilus Edessenus, a Maronite, by profession an astronomer, translated Homer into Syriac by the year 770. Theophan, Chronogr, page 376. Abul Farag Ut Supr, page 217. Remesius, in his very curious account of the manuscript collection of Greek chemists in the library of Saxe-Gotha, relates that soon after the year 750, the Arabians translated Homer and Pindar, amongst other Greek books. Ernest Salom Cyprian Catal Cod Manuscript Bibliotheca Gothan, page 71-78 Apud Fauric. It is, however, certain that the Greek philosophers were their objects. Compare Eusebius, Renaudot de Barbe Aristotel Versionib, Apud Fabric, Library GR 12, page 252-258. Reisenius says that about the year 750 they translated Plato into Arabic, together with the works of S. Austin, Ambrose, Jerome, Leo, and Gregory the Great. Ubi Supr, page 260. Leo Africanus mentions among the works of Averroes Expositiones Republicae Platonis. But he died so late as the year 1206. Demed et Philosophe Arab, chapter 20, Wharton. See Gibbon, volume 10, page 11, endnote. Whose language and literature they seem to have studied with uncommon ardour for upwards of 5 centuries, that is, from AD 754 to the taking of Baghdad in 1258. Rhetoric and logic were their favourite pursuits. Averroes, the great commentator, as he is generally called, is known to have paraphrased Aristotle's rhetoric, and Alpharabius is said to have written no less than 60 distinct treatises on the Aristotelian philosophy, which was publicly taught in Baghdad, Basra, Kufa, Bukharia, Alexandria, Cairo, Morocco, and Fez, as well as in several parts of Spain and Italy, but particularly in the celebrated Schola Salernitana. Note, their learning, but especially their medical knowledge, flourished most in Salerno, a city of Italy, where it formed the famous Schola Salernitana. It must not be forgot that they translated Aristotle's Poetics. There is extant Averroes Summa in Aristotelis Poetriam ex Arabico sermone in Latinum traducta ab Hermano Alemanno praemittitur determinatio ibn Rostin in Poetria Aristotelis venet, 1550. There is a translation of the Poetics into Arabic by Abu Muscarmetta entitled Abotica. See Herbel, Library Oriental, page 18, Col A, page 971, BP 40, Col 2, page 337, Col 2 Farabi, who studied at Baghdad about the year 930. One of the translators of Aristotle's Analytics wrote 60 books on that philosopher's rhetoric, declaring that he had read it over 200 times, and yet was equally desirous of reading it again. Fabric, Library, GR 13265. Der below mentions Aristotle's Morals, translated by Honein, Library Oriental, page 963a. See also page 971a, 973, page 974b. Compare Mosheim, Hist, chapter 1, page 217, 288. Note C, page 2, chapter 1. Averroes also paraphrased Aristotle's Rhetoric. There are also translations into Arabic of Aristotle's Analytics and his treatise of interpretation. The first they call Analytica, and the second Bari Armenias, but Aristotle's logic, metaphysics, and physics pleased them most, particularly the 8 books of his physics, which exhibits a general view of that science. Some of our countrymen were translators of these Arabic books into Latin. Athelard, a monk of Bath, translated the Arabic Euclid into Latin about 1000. Leland script, Brit, page 200. There are some manuscripts of it in the Bodleian Library and elsewhere, but the most beautiful and elegant copy I have seen is on vellum, Trinity College Library at Oxford, Cod, manuscript number 10, Wharton, endnote. For a detailed account, however, of the origin and progress of Grecian literature among the Arabs, I refer the student to Wharton's second dissertation on the history of English poetry, and Enfield's History of Philosophy from Brooker's Historia Critica Philosophiae, a work of considerable merit, though Dr. Gillies is of opinion that his account of Aristotle's philosophy is in many parts erroneous, and in some even unintelligible, while others go still farther and hint that he did not understand Greek. It will there be seen that the acroatic works of the Stagirite were translated, studied, and taught by the learned of Arabia, and that to these works in particular the Arabians seem indebted for all their notions of the philosophical sciences. It must not indeed be denied that there are many subjects connected with the arts and sciences for which the modern nations of Europe are supposed to be indebted to the Arabs. Bossut attributes to them our present system of arithmetical numeration, as well as the first notions of algebra which are found in Diophantus. Note, Cardan considers the Arabs as the real inventors of algebra. Practical geometry and astronomy owe the Arabs eternal gratitude for having given to trigonometrical calculation the simple and commodious form which it has at present. Bossut, page 157, endnote. He gives them the credit of several important discoveries on trigonometrical calculation, and many ingenious improvements and alterations in astronomy. Note, of all the mathematical sciences, astronomy is that which the Arabs have most cultivated, and in which they have made the most remarkable discoveries. Page 159, endnote. An Arab in Spain was the first who attempted a theory of refraction and the twilight, which doctrine Malebranche is said to have enlarged upon, but as he does not quote the author, Bossuet presumes he was unacquainted with his works. In truth, the Arabs seem to have arrived at eminence in almost every science, and even in mechanics. The clepsydra or water clock sent by Harun al-Rashid in 799 to Charlemagne is said to have astonished by its ingenuity the whole of Europe. Note, in the dial of this clepsydra were 12 small doors, forming the divisions of the hours, and each of these doors opened in succession at the hour it marked, and let out little balls, which, falling on a brazen bell, struck the hour. The doors continued open till 12 o'clock, when 12 little knights mounted on horseback came out together, paraded round the dial, and shut all the doors. This machine astonished all Europe, when men's minds were employed chiefly on futile questions of theology and grammar. Bossuet, page 161, endnote. All this must indeed be granted to the Arabs, but it appears from the united testimony of the learned that their philosophy was entirely Grecian. They did not form, says Bruckner, a new system, but merely revived the peripatetic doctrine. Their logic was the logic of Aristotle, and the common introduction to that science, which is now current in Arabia and India, is a simple translation of the isagogy of Porphyry. Aristotle's rhetoric probably led the way to their own, and his logic, when applied to the rudiments of their language, produced that ingenious but intricate and elaborate elementary system which has perhaps not improperly been termed philosophical or transcendental grammar. This then is the origin of the philosophical sciences among the Arabs. Grammar, rhetoric, and logic or dialectics formed the basis to which, if we add arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, note, grammar, rhetoric, and logic formed what the scholastics termed the trivium. Music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy the quadrivium, and these constituting the 7 liberal arts, the very poetically described in the 2 following verses. Gram loquitur, dia verdocet, ret verba colorat, mus canit, ar numerat, geo ponderat, ast colat astra, endnote, which they also cultivated with success. We shall find them pursue, with the exception perhaps of music, the exact course of studies as practiced by the Christian philosophers in the Middle Age. Note, I say with the exception of music, because I am inclined to think that music as a science was not regularly cultivated in Arabia, though some examples may be produced to prove the contrary. The learned Farabi, already mentioned as the translator of Aristotle's Analytics, and who was styled the Coryphaeus of philosophers, deserves perhaps to be recorded as the Timotheus of Arabian musicians, for his performance of the lute before Sultan Seyfud-Dowleh was not inferior to that of the Theban before Alexander. Farabi is said also to have written an introduction to the science of music, which is mentioned in the Bibliothèque de Turquie of Todarini. This valuable work of Todarini's, which seems very little known in India, contains a full account of the arts and sciences as known to or cultivated by the Turks and Arabians, including their grammar, logic, rhetoric, moral philosophy, arithmetic, algebra, geometry, physics and natural history, medicine, chemistry, astronomy, navigation, nautica e nuova accademia de marina, astrology, poetry and music. The work is entitled Letteratura Turchesca, Accademie, Biblioteche e Tipografia in Costantinopoli. Opera dell'Ab. Gia Battista Todarini, Tomo 1, 2, e 3, in Venezia, 1786. The following extract from this work relating to the logic of the Arabs as copied from the Greeks will corroborate what I have stated regarding that science. End note. End of part 1 to preface to Miut Amil and Shurhoo Miut Amil by Abraham Lockett. Recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater, recorded in Oxford, England. Part 2 of Preface to the Miut Amil and Shurhoo Miut Amil by Abraham Lockett. Read for the Librivox Language Learning Collection, Volume 5. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Abu Jalal. Preface to the Miut Amil and Shurhoo Miut Amil by Abraham Lockett. Part 2. I have now to offer a few words on the grammatical works here translated, but of their authors, unfortunately, I know little or nothing. The commentator, indeed, attributes the Miut Amil to Abdul Qahir ibn Abdul Rahman of Gurgan. Note the Gurkhan of Ibn Hawkal and the Qur'an of modern maps. End note. Whom he styles the most excellent of the learned, but he does not say in what age he lived, nor in what his excellence consisted, and we are left to form our own opinion of his merits from 5 pages of Arabic syntax. I find his name, however, in the Mir'atul Junan. Note, Tarikh Yafi'i Mir'atul Junan. End note. With a few particulars, which, as we have nothing better, we must substitute for a biographical memoir. Abdul Qahir, surnamed from eminence, An-Nahwi, or the grammarian, was of the sect of Shafi'i and one of the followers of Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari. Besides the Miut Amil and Jumul, another introduction to Arabic syntax, he wrote a learned commentary termed Al-Mughni in 3 volumes upon the Izzah, besides several other celebrated works on grammar and rhetoric, and died in the 474th year of the Hijrah, or about the middle of the 11th century of the Christian era. These facts, though a little mutilated and with some additions, are given in the preface to Meninsky. Note, Abu Bakr Abdel Kahir, gente persa, domo Georgianus, grammaticus et orator eruditus, praeclara edidit opera, ex quorum numero sunt, commentarius in rhetoricam dilucidatio nuncupatam, expositio particularum. Why alone particularum? Quae centum regentes dicuntur, commentarius in Alcoranum, et alia poetica opera, obit anno Hegirai 471, de Ling Arab 34. End note. On the authority of Shamsuddin, the author of a commentary on the Jumul, and both these works, the former with a Latin translation, are said to be deposited in the Escurial in Spain. Abdul Qahir appears to be the first grammarian who reduced the governing powers of the Arabic language to a definite number. Note, the author of the first works on Arabic regimen is said to have been Al-Khalil ibn Ahmed ibn Umar, who was born in 100 and died in the year 170 of the Hejra. See the biographical work termed Kitabul Azhar. End note. And as he lived at a time when Grecian literature of every kind was ardently cultivated in Arabia, and when in fact almost every learned Arab made a merit of studying and copying the philosophical writings of the Greeks, it is not very improbable that the Centiloquium of Ptolemy, note see Vos de Natura Artium, the work is also attributed to Hermes, end note. A work on astrology, which must have been popular at that period in Arabia, gave him the first hint for the title of his treatise on regimen, and produced the Miut Amil, or 100 governing powers. The extreme brevity of the text has occasioned many commentaries on the Miut Amil, but that which usually accompanies it in this country, and which I have here translated, is generally supposed, I believe, to be written by a native of India. D'Herbelot mentions but one commentary by Ibn Hisham, whose name as a grammarian he probably confounds with Husamuddin, who is stated in the Kashf-uz-Zunun to be one of the commentators of the Mi'at Amil. Note, the commentators mentioned in the Kashf-uz-Zunun are Haji Baba Tusi, Haji Baba of Tus, Husamuddin Tuqati, Husamuddin of Tuqat, Mullah Ahmad ibn Mustafa, Mullah Ahmad bin Mustafa, with Scholia written in 816. Yahya bin Yakhsha, Yahya bin Nuh bin Israel. Pocock speaks of an historian of that name, Amr Muhammad Adad al-Malik ibn Hisham, Obit anno Hejirai 213, Yuxta alios 218. Pocock Spec Arab His, page 362. Meninsky also mentions Ibn Hisham of Cairo, who died in 761 Hejirai. It may be necessary to inform the student that Averroes, see page 10, is corrupted from Ibn Rushd. His entire name is Abul Walid Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Rushd. See Hist Med et Epit Yafei Pocock. End note. It is possible, however, that D'Herbelot alludes to Sheikh Jamaluddin Abu Muhammad Yusuf, who was also known by the name of Ibn Hisham, but as no such commentary is attributed to him in either of the biographical works above alluded to, I feel some hesitation in allowing him to be the author of the Shurhoo Mi'at Amil. D'Herbelot, note, he calls the Mi'at Amil the 100 particles, quotation in French, end note. However, was certainly but very little acquainted with Abdul Qahir and his writings, and the account he gives of the Mi'at Amil in particular is a demonstrative proof that he was ignorant of the simplest principles of Arabic grammar. This is all the information I have been able to collect of the author of the Mi'at Amil and his commentators. Something more might perhaps have been found had I been more industrious, but I confess I did not think it necessary to toss over half the manuscripts in the college library for the purpose of adding one or two obscure anecdotes to the life of Sheikh Abdul Qahir. Neither would the search have rewarded my pains, for biography is a very different thing in Asia from what it is in Europe. There are no Pater Nostra Rose, nor Cadell and Davies in Arabia, and consequently there are no Boswells nor Piozzis. A grammarian may write 5 pages of syntax there without having 5 quarto volumes of memorabilia recorded of him. For who could copy them, or who would read them? The life of an Arabian worthy indeed is frequently dispatched in a line, and is seldom more entertaining or instructive than a hikyaket or a village epitaph. His name, his years, with a radiyallahu anhu, note, radiyallahu anhu, may God be satisfied with him, a pious petition which almost invariably follows the name of the defunct in Oriental biography, end note, or a holy text from the Qur'an, supply the place of fame and elegy, and constitute the brief memorials of a literary career. Note, I ought perhaps to apologize for venturing this opinion of Arabian biography, for Sir William Jones, whose authority will doubtless be considered decisive, has given a very different account of the matter. He prefers the biography of Ibn Khalikan not only to that of Nepos and Laertius, but even to that of Plutarch himself. Nay, he seems inclined to rank the historian above all the biographers of ancient and modern times. Quote, Nescio an hic omnibus vitarum scriptoribus sit anteponendus. Est certe copiosior nepote, elegantior Plutarcho Laertio iucundior, and so on. To all of which I can only answer, consult the biography of Ibn Khalikan. End note. Such is the life of Abdul Qahir, as handed down to us by two very popular historians, and the amount of the whole is simply this, that he was an eminent grammarian, that he wrote the Mughni, the Jumul, and the Miut Amil, and that he died in the year 474 of the Hijrah. There is no date to the commentary, nor can I pretend to settle one. I suspect, however, that it is comparatively modern. The author, at the conclusion of it, speaks of Ibn Malik, the grammarian, who died in AH 672, but if Derbelot's information be correct, it will probably give an antiquity of 500 years to the work, as Ibn Hisham is known to have died in 762. The Miut Amil must be considered as a mere textbook, in which the governing powers of the Arabic language are arranged into appropriate classes, their grammatical offices defined, and their primitive senses illustrated by easy, familiar examples. The commentary is an enlarged exposition of the governing powers after the precise order laid down in the text, for it preserves the same arrangement of the parts, the same definitions of the rules, and the same examples illustrative of the original force of the terms, adding however to the primitive or current senses the more immediately consequential or secondary acceptations. Let us explain by an example. The preposition ba', which is the first in the first class of grammatical agents, is stated simply in the text to be a genitive particle, and one example is subjoined to illustrate its force. The commentator repeats the rule regarding its regimen, but adds its primitive acceptation, which he states to be union, and this he considers as twofold, either absolute, as denoting actual coalition or cohesion of parts, or relative, as implying proximity or contiguity of person or place. The first he exemplifies by the phrase bihi da'un, he is sick, or sickness is inherent in him. The latter by the sentence marartu bi Zaydin, I passed by Zayd. He then goes on to define the collateral and accidental significations of this particle under the various relations of instrumentality, causality or causation, concomitance or association, substitution or exchange, inclusion or comprehension, with some others, which may be seen by referring to the translation, and each of these senses he elucidates by one familiar example. This is the general mode of analysis, as adopted in the commentary. The words are all considered either separately or in classes, their original and accidental significations defined and illustrated, and their analogous and anomalous syntactical structures pointed out and determined. The etymological formation of some words are occasionally explained, but this is but seldom, and only in particular cases where words apparently simple are shown to be compound, as kadha, formed from the particle kaf of similitude and the pronoun there. The commentary is short, is a simple introduction comprising a distinct general view of the essential parts of Arabic regimen and nothing more. To render it, however, as extensively useful as possible, I have transcribed from the works of several of the most eminent Arabian grammarians whatever appeared to me best calculated to illustrate the force and application of the several governing powers, and these with my own observations and remarks, subjoined to the translation, form a perpetual commentary on the text, which I trust will be found useful. To these annotations, sometimes critical and sometimes explanatory, I have occasionally added others of a more light and miscellaneous nature. They are not indeed of much importance to the work, and might well enough have been omitted, but they amused me at the time of writing, and may probably amuse others. To extract mirth or humour, however, out of Arabic grammar, must, I am persuaded, be looked upon as a hopeless attempt, an attempt perhaps not altogether dissimilar to that on record of certain ingenious people in the island of Matiotechni, who are said to have employed themselves in gathering grapes from thorns and figs from thistles, or of others who pitched nets to catch the wind and caught cock lobsters. The original works from which I have selected the materials for the notes are as follows. Shurhoo Wafia. Note: Sheikh Jamaluddin Abu Amr wa Uthman ibn Amr al-Ma'ruf bi Ibn al-Hajib al-Maliki al-Nahwi. Died AH 646. End note. Shurhoo Mullah. Note: Abdul Rahman bin Ahmad Nuruddin al-Jami. Died AH 895. End note. Shurhoo Ruzi'. Note: Radiyuddin Muhammad bin al-Hasan al-Astarabadi al-Nahwi. Died AH 816. End note. Shurhoo Misbah. Note: Tajuddin Muhammad al-Asrani. Died AH. End note. Shurhoo Alfiyya. Note: Sheikh Abu Muhammad Abdullah bin Abdul Rahman al-Shahir bi Ibn Aqil al-Nahwi. Died AH 869. End note. Qatrun Nada'. Note: Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Yusuf Hisham al-Nahwi. Died AH 862. End note. Mufassal. Note: Allama Jarullah Abu al-Qasim Mahmud bin Amr al-Zamakhshari. Died AH 838. Pocock has given the name erroneously. Shurhoo Shawahid li Mughni, that is, Explicatio Testimoniorum quae in grammatica dicta Mughni Labib. Abu Muhammad Abdullah bin Hisham. Conscripta afferuntur, cuius autor est Jalaluddinus, idem qui commentarium in Al-Qurani partem scripsit. Page 367. End note. Of these, the three first are commentaries on the Kafiyah, the first by Ibn al-Hajib, the author of the text, the second by Mullah Jami, the poet, and the third by Radiyuddin Muhammad of Astrabad. The Wafiyah, though a very valuable work, is perhaps but little read. The Shurhoo Mullah, as it is generally called, is a logical and argumentative comment on the text, and is everywhere studied in India, but the commentary by Radi, from which indeed the greater part of Jami's is supposed to be borrowed, is the most voluminous and elaborate of all, and is justly considered a chef d'oeuvre of grammatical science. Of the other works, namely the Shurhoo Misbah by Tajuddin Muhammad of Asfaran, the Qatrun Nada' by Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Yusuf Hisham, and the Shurhoo Alfiyya by Sheikh Abu Muhammad Abdullah bin Abdul Rahman, more generally known by the name of Ibn Aqil, I have nothing particular to offer. They are all popular works in Arabia, and the latter in particular seems to possess the same rank in Baghdad as the Shurhoo Mullah does in India, a fact which is certainly somewhat remarkable, as the former is as much famed for simplicity as the latter is for subtlety. The same may be observed of the Mughniul Labib, by far the most useful work on Arabic grammar with which I am acquainted. It has supplied me with almost everything valuable on the particles. In order to illustrate with greater effect the practical applications of these most subtle parts of speech, as they are sometimes called, I have added at the conclusion of the annotations on each an Arabic story, in which the particle will be found to occur under all the senses ascribed to it in the commentary. The natural and popular use of the word will by this means be better understood, its lighter and more evanescent shades of meaning rendered more obvious and determinate, and the whole series of primitive, derivative, and metaphorical acceptations exhibited at one view in an easy and regular scheme of explication. I have pursued this plan throughout the volume. A story is appropriated to every preposition, and afterwards to every class of governors consecutively. The words thus explained are distinguished by figures in the original, that the student may be enabled to compare their use with the explanations given in the commentary, and the whole is accompanied with an easy English version. The stories thus given are partly original and partly extracted from books, either printed or in manuscript. Those at the commencement of the commentary were prepared by Sayyid Ahmed, a learned Arab of the College of Hanifa, who accompanied me from Baghdad in the year 1812. The sudden and unexpected death, however, of this most excellent scholar, a few months after his arrival in Calcutta, deprived me, at an early period, of the benefit of his services, and forced me, reluctantly, to relinquish the extensive plan of illustration, which he had himself originally proposed, and by which I had hoped to diversify and enliven my commentary with much curious and interesting matter. This pleasing scheme, however, was in a great measure prevented by his death. I had no choice of materials, and was frequently obliged to adopt a number of insipid stories, which under other circumstances I should certainly have rejected. The most entertaining portion of them was supplied me by an ingenious native of Yemen in Arabia, Nathaniel Sabat. Note, at present employed by the Rev. T. Thomason on a translation of the New Testament into Arabic, end note, whose literary talents and acquirements are well known in India, and for whose useful assistance in this department of my work I am under considerable obligations. My constant guide and companion in almost every stage of this translation was Molavi Amanatullah, a learned native of India, formerly on the establishment of the College of Fort William, and a more able guide or skilful and judicious instructor I know not well where I could have found. For poetical versions of sundry passages from the Arabian poets, which will be found occasionally interspersed through the notes, I am entirely indebted to the kindness of my friend Mr. Wilson. Note, with the exception of the paraphrase in page 48, end note, the learned and elegant translator of the Megha Duta, note, or Cloud Messenger, a poem in the Sanskrit language by Kalidas, end note, and to Captain Roebuck of the college, who afforded me his assistance in conducting the work through the press, I beg leave to offer my best thanks. I have no further observations to make on the works here translated, and of the translation itself any observation on my part must be useless. I shall therefore offer none. It may speak for itself or be silent. The typographical errors are indeed rather numerous, and require some apology. I believe they were occasioned in a considerable degree by the rapidity with which a large portion of the work was hurried through the press, for it is certain that the greater part of the commentary, with all its appendages and extracts, stories, annotations, etc., were prepared, translated, and printed off in somewhat less than 5 months. I have endeavoured, however, to rectify these mistakes as well as I could,
by a table of errata, which will be found in general to consist of little more than transpositions in the vowel points. The errors in the English part are not likely to embarrass the student, and I have accordingly omitted to record them. If to the 2 elementary works contained in this volume be added the 1st and 5th chapters of the Misbah, note the Misbah is the 3rd, and the Hidayat al-Nahm the 4th of the 5 books on Arabic grammar published in Calcutta in 1802. End note. Or rather perhaps a portion of the Hidayat al-Nahm, a body of syntax will be formed sufficiently comprehensive for every practicable purpose whatever. But if the student aspires to a higher and more accurate knowledge of the subject, and would understand not only the rules, but the reasons of the rules, with all the delicacies, refinements, and peculiarities of this admirable system of speech, I would recommend to him a Grammar of the Arabic Language by Mr. Lumsden, the Persian and Arabic professor in the College of Fort William, a work which I am persuaded will be found to exhibit the most profound and masterly analysis of the language that has ever been presented to the public. Calcutta, 23rd July, 1814. End of Preface to the Miut Amil and Shurhoo Miut Amil by Abraham Lockett. Read by Abu Jalal. Recorded in Oxford, England.